Surfacing tonight over new criminal justice reforms in Louisiana. Under the controversial law, almost 1,900 prisoners in the Pelican State will get their prison sentences cut short beginning at midnight tonight.
But as Chief Investigative Reporter Stacey Cameron discovered, a number of prisoners in Caddo Parish and possibly all over Louisiana are going free despite committing a serious felony that some feel should keep them locked up much longer.
KSLA has been digging into the criminal background of more than 60 inmates getting released starting November 1st from the Caddo Parish Jail. The Louisiana Department of Corrections gave KSLA a preliminary list of the Caddo prisoners going free under new criminal justice reforms signed by Governor John Bel Edwards that are intended to shorten prison terms of less serious offenders and reduce prison population. But examining this DOC document dated October 26th, I found something disturbing. 3 Caddo prisoners who pleaded guilty to felonies involving domestic violence were getting released just 2.5 months after their convictions. In an email, Governor Bell's office said one of those prisoners was no longer going free. During a second review of case files, officials determined that inmate didn't qualify for early release because his crime, aggravated assault, domestic abuse, is a crime of violence.
We have the district attorneys on board. We have the sheriffs on board.
Under bipartisan legislation that put Louisiana's criminal justice reforms into place, only nonviolent, non-sexual offenders can get their sentences cut short. A list given to KSLA by the governor's office lists all the crimes of violence under Louisiana law. Felonies like murder, rape, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated assault are all included. But remarkably, when it comes to domestic abuse battery against a dating partner or household member, it's only considered a violent crime if the victim was burned and seriously injured. 2 of the inmates KSLA identified were multiple offenders, each serving their 3rd sentence for domestic abuse battery. Even as repeat offenders, neither prisoner considered a violent criminal under current Louisiana law, and the new reforms, meaning right now they are scheduled to go free in November.
That's Stacey Cameron reporting. The latest list, according to the DOC, shows 61 Caddo inmates and 37 Bossier inmates are scheduled for early release sometime in November, tomorrow being November 1st. You can read the full list of what is considered a crime of violence right now by clicking on this story under KSLA Investigates on our website or on our KSLA mobile app.
When we think of crimes of violence, murder, rape, kidnapping, aggravated assault, all come to mind. But in a KSLA News 12 investigation, we uncovered that someone in Louisiana can attack their spouse or partner multiple times, and their act may not be considered a crime of violence. Now, after our first report uncovered a gap in state law, some legislators say they want to take a second look. Here's KSLA Chief Investigative Reporter Stacey Cameron.
The crime is called domestic abuse battery, and Louisiana law says it's the intentional use of force or violence against family, a household member, or a dating partner. Following our initial report, some state representatives now want change.
A third-time offender doesn't seem to get the hint.
The reaction of 2 local state representatives, Republican Larry Bagley,
Had no idea about that. I didn't know that language was in there.
and Democrat Cedric Glover,
That's something to me that is just counterintuitive.
was bipartisan surprise after watching my report. Were getting released just 2.5 months after their conviction. And learning felony domestic abuse battery is not a crime of violence in Louisiana unless the victim is burned and seriously injured.
We can't accept that. No one wants to see a family member abused by their spouse.
After Glover watched my investigation, he was upset to discover Louisiana law prohibits domestic abusers from possessing a firearm, but it does not consider them violent offenders.
From my perspective, anything that involves something severe enough, profound enough, injurious enough to prevent you from being able to possess a weapon should in fact be considered a crime of violence.
Under state law, violent offenders get stiffer penalties, and now they must serve 65% of their sentence in prison. But since domestic abuse battery is not on the crimes of violence list, people convicted of that crime can get out of prison much earlier than other violent offenders.
You've got purse snatching on that list, you've got carjacking on that list, and yet you can strangle your wife and not be included on that list.
Mariah Winiski heads the Louisiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She says domestic abuse can get seriously violent and still not be classified as a crime of violence.
If you used physical violence, so if you hit them, kick them, slap them, or strangle them, and it does not escalate to the point where a prosecutor could charge second-degree battery, for example, or aggravated assault or something like that, then it's not a crime of violence.
Because they are not deemed violent offenders, some inmates convicted of felony domestic abuse battery qualified for early release under new criminal justice reforms signed by Governor John Bel Edwards. And in fact, KSLA discovered 2 inmates pleading guilty to that crime for the 3rd time and got out of the Caddo Parish Jail just 2.5 months after their convictions.
I would just assume if you hit somebody in the face with your fist, which I know happens, that would be a violent act. Obviously, it's not.
At his office in Stonewall, Representative Bagley told me after watching my report, he's interested in amending Louisiana law.
There's going to have to be some changing of the definition, interpretation of those laws, I think.
And expanding felony domestic abuse battery on the crimes of violence list. Representative Glover agrees.
And it is certainly something that I think warrants additional review, if not some attention in this upcoming legislative session.
But Caddo Parish District Attorney James Stewart,
how the Department of Corrections classify people is a lot different than what we do on a charging deal,
says he does not need the law changed to convict domestic abusers as violent offenders.
We have a lot of different charges with much higher penalties that we use in these situations. We can charge them with ag battery, second-degree battery, attempted murder. All those are crimes of violence.
While Winiski applauds that legal tactic,
it's certainly a really good practice.
She says there are still too many cases where the Louisiana criminal justice system lets violent domestic offenders off easy.
So even if you're charging with an aggravated assault, it may still be pled down to a domestic abuse battery.
Winiski saying that's part of the reason Louisiana ranks near the top in domestic abuse homicides in the U.S.
What we know about domestic homicide is that it typically escalates to that point, right? So domestic violence doesn't start with a homicide. Typically it starts small and it escalates over time. So we would be looking at getting either second or third offense and subsequent offenses put onto this list of crimes of violence.
There may be reasons why from others who are part of the legislature as well as the legal and prosecutorial community who may take a different perspective, but those are questions that certainly will be asked going forward.
And Winiski believes treating persons convicted of domestic abuse battery as violent offenders as soon as possible will save lives in Louisiana. Glover co-sponsored the criminal justice reforms and Bagley voted for them. But both say even if the reforms did not pass, they are now convinced Louisiana law needs to be changed to fully cover domestic abuse battery as a crime of violence. And they thank KSLA News 12 for bringing the problem to their attention. I'm Chief Investigative Reporter Stacey Cameron.